think there's a lot of energy in India. To do business in a different country, you have to come and acquaint yourself with that culture.
So now I'm with Archana, managing partner of Rukam Capital.
I love Japan and I'm happy to talk to anybody from Japan. So we are an early stage venture capital fund. So I'm one of the few handful women solo GPs in India.
Is there any industry you think there's going to be more startups successful in India?
Look, I think India is a land of opportunity because we have so many problems, and the more problems I think a country has, therefore there's more opportunity to build companies that solve for those, right? So that's a broader statement. Now, if I were to look at the two sectors where we deploy, one is consumer, the other is tech. Consumer, India is again an underserved country from, if you look at it from a brand perspective. We've got a handful of MNC brands, but they are not so close to the consumers. And again, if you look at any developed economy, the brands, the mainstay brands are local brands always, right? Including Japan. So India needs its own brands, and we've got this large aspirational population which is moving into, some parts of middle class are moving into the more affluent part of the middle class. So there's a lot of pent-up demand in India, and we need many more brands to service that demand. On the tech side, India has done very well in SaaS, we've done well in B2B, we've also done well in consumer tech. I think SaaS is one example where we've exported companies especially to the US, and it's been a big success story. I think the answer right now is generative AI has got all the eyeballs and all the VC capital, including us. So in India, the race globally now is what is the generative AI part that is relevant for each country, right? I think it's a sovereign issue almost now. It's not just about a few people getting wealthy, or I think pretty anybody who is doing anything in tech is looking in that direction. I think climate is another area where increasingly funds are coming up. And I think climate, again, is a very broad and wide swath. So it intersects and impacts so many different sectors, right? I think EV mobility is another, logistics, EV mobility, if I take that as a single bucket, I think that's a great area of interest. So for a small fund like us, I think it's too late now to enter that sector. We had looked at gaming in the past. We will relook at gaming. There are lots of big companies that have got built out, unicorns that have got built out. But I still think there's a lot of interesting plays still available.
What do you think are the unique solutions that you would only see in India?
I think language is by itself a unique problem for India, right? Okay. We have so many different languages. Each state has not only its own language but dialects. I would not be able to comprehend, let's say, somebody speaking in fluent Tamil to me. And if I were to call it the first generation of tech that happened in India, a lot of the deeper penetration in the market was limited because language was the barrier, right? So the Indian internet was entirely English. Then a little bit of Hindi started coming in, which is again spoken by a much larger base of people. So you needed an ability to reach all of them at a very low cost. So language was not the barrier for them to consume those products and services. Okay. So for us, LLM is really a gift from the gods almost, I would say, because it's not a problem that many countries face the way we do, right? A big swath of people are being pulled out of poverty into the middle class, and they want to consume, even if it was income generating product or service. How do they consume it if they don't speak English? I think there are so many unique problems that India has. I think we'll see some interesting companies emerge here.
Very interesting. Now, you told me about how languages are different, and I believe the culture is so different within the country too, right? Do you think there are space for foreign companies to actually be able to do well here in India?
I think India is a very, very interesting market for foreign companies. Large-scale companies are already here, including Japanese companies. Within our diversity, there's so much that unifies us. So there are some commonalities between all of us as Indians, and that is what makes the market interesting from a company's point of view. But I think like any other market, I've been to Japan, and I've been to Japan actually for a couple of startup events.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The thing is that if I wanted to, for example, try and speak to LPs in Japan, right, I have to build that relationship. I think to do business in a different country, you have to come and acquaint yourself with that culture, because ultimately, as human beings, we are consumers of emotion, not products. Products are expression of that emotion, right? So you've got to understand what makes us happy, what makes us sad, what makes us angry, what makes us reject a product or a service. So it's about being able to come and understand those nuances. And I think the market then rewards you for it. Many, many companies have done really well here. But I go to a lot of startup events around the world, and It's a question I'm asked very, very frequently.
Okay.
That we want to come to India, how do we do it? A lot of startups do ask this question. I think there are some structured programs, but I think many more can be done. But I think ultimately there is an investment of time and money that you have to do to try and understand. So my recommendation would be, to start with, is come to India, maybe for 15 days. But if you just fly in and out, you're unlikely to really comprehend, and you're likely to make some wrong analysis. To understand why somebody wants to eat something or behaves, you need a little bit more sort of time to understand. Like in Japan, I'm so impressed the way everybody bows all the way down to the waist. And it happens so frequently. And I'm like, how do people keep doing that? And every time I go to Japan and I come back, I'm going to do this. It fascinates me, but I don't understand it fully, the nuances. So obviously, I would need to spend time. So what I'm saying is, you do need to spend time to understand the country to be able to do a successful business.
Yeah, I was actually asking my Indian startup friend recently on like why they actually
yeah. Every foreigner wants to know this about Indians.
No, I was actually curious because I think Indian local startups are pretty strong. For example, like Flipkart, Ola, the local ones, the players are doing very well.
But there's so many things to solve for. As consumers, whether of tech products or physical products and services, I think we are fairly open. So if you look at the automotive sector, for example, it's entirely dominated by international brands, right?
Are there anything like in terms of like culture or manners, like, or doing business here in India? Are they like something unique compared to like other countries?
I think there's a lot of energy in India. When I travel to some other parts of the world, and I'm not going to name those parts of the world, I see a little bit of tiredness overall. I mean, Indians want to make something of themselves. And I think that energy is very infectious, and I think that will propel anybody who's part of this sort of epoch in our country's sort of growth to succeed. I think failure is a function, of course, of wrong decisions that the individual makes. But, you do need a rising tide. And in a rising tide, hopefully all boats will float.
Yeah, definitely. Like I've been talking to a lot of friends, they're so positive. They have a big dream. That's something very different compared to like I guess.
That's what I'm saying. Here, there's a lot of scrappiness. There's a lot of wanting to do something much more than what their circumstance could limit them to, and I don't see it in many other countries.
And definitely like the friendliness too.
Yes.
Like
we are very friendly.
I was surprised, to be honest. Like after visiting all the countries, and I came to India, like they invited me to many parties, startup events, and all that. So I think it's a very vibrant startup ecosystem.
And I think we like to feed our guests. We're always offering food to our guests. And when I have visitors coming from overseas, they're like, God, we've eaten so much. We put on like 5 kilos in India. And like, yeah, we like to eat. So India is very, very hospitable. I think that is a universal sentiment. That's why I'm saying we are not resistant to foreign brand, because we like to include people in our own. So yeah, so we are friendly and fun.
Do you see any like other weaknesses or like struggles you think the startup ecosystem or startups are facing in India?
I think more capital needs to flow in. I think we need much more capital than what is the opportunity here. One of the positives that India has is a very strong educated workforce, especially on the tech side. Indian parents focus a lot on education. So that has also helped this propelling us to where we are in the startup ecosystem. So we've got the IT right across the road here. So which is one big hub for entrepreneurship, because a lot of engineers coming out of IITs, whether IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, they are the ones who start up a lot of, and the IITs have done a good job also of encouraging their students and their alumni. And India has done very well in how it's the amount of high quality engineering colleges, which is why we've got such a well-trained engineering sort of workforce in place. And in India, we do pay heed to what the government's push is also. And they really made it acceptable. Indian parents, if they hear it, that the Indian government is also sort of, so Indian parents tend to want their children to have a safe and stable jobs as opposed to being an entrepreneur. But I think more parents are now open to the idea. So for an Indian to be an entrepreneur, it's almost like you need to carry your family along with you in that decision, right?
Okay.
We don't take wildly independent sort of. So there is a little bit of that still. So it helps that the Indian government is showing that it's viable. And now there are a lot of role models as well. So with those role models now, people are much more also enthused to be a founder.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So you started this one because you saw the problem of there's more need for the access to capital. Do you still see this as a problem in India?
Yes,
Or-
yes.
Okay.
I think we've got a very aspirational young under 35 population. The truth is that a lot of founders do start in their 20s and 30s. And a lot of people in India who start, they again don't have access to the kind of capital that is called friends and family round that typically you can raise reasonably easily in a developed country, for example, right? A lot of the founders who are starting out in India come from backgrounds where capital is scarce. So they do need capital that can sustain them through all the stages of fundraising that is required. Now, there is some amount of early stage capital, but I don't think it's enough, because if you look at the rejection rate of any VC in India, I think we barely even fund 1% of the total pool of startups that we see.
Oh, wow.
So that's the kind of imbalance there is between capital available and the founders who can and should deserve attention from a VC, right? So I'm talking now about the early stage. At Series A, that capital really shrinks. So a lot of mortality that we see in India is because there's not enough capital at Series A. These companies are not necessarily dying because the founders are bad, but sometimes it takes longer to come to that product market fit. So then the next pool of capital is at Series B. So again, a lot of founders start struggling at that point. So the thing is, you don't want enforced mortality, right? For a country like India, which has such a large market size, you want actually more businesses than not to make it to a certain threshold and mark of size and scale of company. And I think for that, we do need a lot more capital across all stages.
And now that the funding winter is here, so in this situation, what sort of strategy is Rukam Capital taking?
I think first of all, I think we're turning to spring now.
Okay.
I think winter is beginning to get over.
Okay.
For us, we've stayed in the market through the funding winter. A lot of the funding winter that India saw was at a later stage.
Okay.
So we've stayed interested and we continue to deploy capital. From what I can see of the market, I think people are coming back, even the later stage. I think a couple of other things that happened for the Indian market was SoftBank sort of stopped deploying, Tiger has stopped deploying, and these were the guys who were doing the big checks. For a lot of investors, the question was, how do we get an exit if there's no SoftBank and there's no Tiger to give us those exits? But a lot of people had raised their funds, so they had to deploy also. And I think, at least in my case, I had the support of my LPs to continue to deploy. But of course, I think the lens was much more harsher now than what it was a year and a half ago.
But now, SoftBank's coming back again. And
That's what I'm saying. Now it's spring. It's no longer winter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That was so insightful. If there's anything you want to add or any comments.
I think, first of all, I want to say, please come to India and explore all the opportunities that India has. Whether you're an entrepreneur, an LP, or a VC, I think there is something for everyone in this ecosystem. It'd be interesting to do many more engagements between all of these three sort of key stakeholders. And if anybody's there who wants to do it with me, I'm happy to engage.
Please contact Archana if you're interested. And I hope to keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.